Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to be speaking to you here today. I'd like to thank Watts for inviting me here to attend this important conference. As I say, it's a privilege to be speaking to you. I'd like to be able to say it was a pleasure, but frankly I don't regard it as a pleasure to be here today because I fear that this conference could really turn out to be an inquest on the terminal division of Sri Lanka, which in my view is already well on the way. Just a few brief words as to why I, as an Englishman, should be standing here today and talking to you. My formal university academic qualifications are as a political scientist, but I think possibly that on-the-ground experience is far more important, and I have carried out conflict analyses over the last 10-12 years for Jane's Intelligence Review in Bosnia, Kosovo, Nepal, Northeast India, Aceh, East Timor, Uganda, Algeria, Eritrea, Sudan, Nagorno Karabakh, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and of course Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, it's a tricky job anywhere, working as really a professional prophet of doom, which is what my Jane's work really entailed, me undertaking this rather tricky task. Fortune tellers are comfortable with predictions in a darkened room, but making predictions in print is always considerably more hazardous. I didn't always get it right, but I think it's fair to say, without being too conceited, I did get it right most of the time. There's one thing I'd like to make very, very clear here before I make any of my comments. I have no personal axe to grind in relation to the future of Sri Lanka. I have no political interest as a foreigner. I have no connections with any political party in Sri Lanka, and I have no economic interest as a businessman or an entrepreneur. It's fair to say that I did have ambitions to invest money in Sri Lanka and to live in Sri Lanka when I went there in 2001, 2002, but those dreams came to naught, and as I stand here today, I have no interest whatsoever in Sri Lanka. I do, however, have very strong views about Sri Lanka, and I know there are many people in this room who are aware of those views. I believe that the country of Sri Lanka should not be offered as some extravagant reward for a group of avaricious terrorists. I admit I am prejudiced. I've observed terrorists in more than a dozen countries, and I've worked with terrorist groups as well as an observer. I've seen the blood and the misery with my own eyes, which terrorists inflict on those people whose interests they often claim to represent. I don't like what terrorists stand for, and I don't like their methods. And I do believe that their methods, their very methods, intrinsically deny terrorists the capability of engaging in any meaningful peace process. The crucial question before us today, I think, must be, does the LTTE want peace? And if so, what sort of peace? The answer seems clear to me. Of course the LTTE wants peace, but that is to say, peace on its own terms. And its own terms imply the terminal division of the sovereign state of Sri Lanka, with 2/3 of the coast and half of the landmass ceded to the LTTE in perpetuity. In the past, I've not been shy about making my views known. I regard this as not just a Sri Lankan issue, but in fact a universal moral issue. When I addressed the Colombo Rotary Club on April the 23rd, 2002, the reaction in the room at the Intercontinental Hotel was, let us say, a trifle muted. Stunned, possibly, might be a more accurate description. I had at that time underestimated the impact of what I said. I termed what was going on in Sri Lanka as the greatest giveaway in history. This, of course, did not sit well in UNP government circles. I identified then what I personally found most worrying about the peace process that was going on. And I realize now, in retrospect, that it came as a shock, it came as news at that time. I averred then that the LTTE was implementing, and I quote, a whole series of sophisticated strategies designed to occupy all the political and social space throughout the north and the east of the country. The strategies encompass all areas of public life and include, and there's quite a long list here, forcing government department heads to work for the LTTE, taxing civil servants 8% of their salaries, controlling the business of government cooperatives and thereby obtaining a steady stream of income. All contracts for government and NGO projects to be carried out by LTTE-approved contractors and income thereby to be derived. Controlling and using all available government resources. Demeaning activities of competing political groups, like the PDP. Sending cadres into government areas in defiance of conditions of the MOU. Influencing and using teachers, students, and labour unions to carry out hartals, demonstrations, picketing and protests. Erection of monuments to martyrs and LTTE figures. Influencing government servants to use LTTE headquarters in place of government facilities in the Eastern Province. Influencing civilians to make legal complaints via the LTTE rather than to the police. Organising mass Tamil awakening rallies known as Pongu Tamils. Classes on Elam in schools. Edicts on dress code for women, instructing them to dress in traditional clothes. Restrictions on businesses involved in the private tutoring of school children. And the creation of a general psychosis of fear in areas coveted by the LTT to be included in the state of Tamil Elam. A state of this psychosis of fear to be brought about by enforced conscription of youth into the LTT, general coercion and extortion of funds from traders, especially in the Muslim community. I said at that time, in addition to the undermining of government control and authority, the enhancement of LTT military capability is being undertaken through the reconstruction of defences, accelerated recruitment, reinforcement of command posts and radio rooms with concrete allowed into LTT areas under the MOU, smuggling of arms and ammunition, building up of arms and ammunition stockpiles in government areas, movement of heavy mortars and machine guns into the east, an increased level of training, intensified reconnaissance on army, special task force and police locations, and the reorganization of LTT cadres into regiments. Military cadres are moving into government-held areas under the conditions created by the MOU and undertaking their missions with little impediment. When I said all this 28 months ago in Colombo, large numbers of people thought I was paranoid. Some thought I was quite mad. Others, like Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, who proceeded to set his goons on me, thought I was dangerous. As the PM described me, I was an enemy of the peace process. Wickremesinghe, instead of occupying himself with the real enemies of Sri Lanka, set up a Prime Ministerial Security Division at Temple Trees to put the enemies of the peace process under special surveillance. telephone tapping, physical surveillance, and illegal searches were all part and parcel of the work of this new unit. I was even termed a warmonger in the public print. Well, in my view, it's not necessary to blindly support a peace process per se without analyzing and assessing its implications and making some sort of balanced judgment. If a peace process looks likely to institutionalize political violence, support the abrogation of human rights and an intolerance of democracy, imply approval of a megalomaniac murderer, then I, for one, find myself quite unable